Madison Sterling thought she had it all figured out. 2.3 million followers watched her pregnancy announcement go viral at Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant. But across the room sat her billionaire ex-husband with his new fiancée, and the look of pure shock on his face told Madison everything she needed to know. He was counting back 12 weeks, to the night she'd been vulnerable, to the night that created the child growing inside her. What Madison didn't know was that this moment would trigger a deadly game of revenge, betrayal, and billion-dollar criminal conspiracies. Two powerful men would destroy everything to possess her, and before it's over, Madison would discover that sometimes the only way to survive the perfect storm is to become the hurricane yourself. This is her story. Madison Sterling adjusted her ring light one final time, the Manhattan skyline glittering behind her through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Elevation, the city's most exclusive rooftop restaurant. Her phone displayed the numbers she still couldn't believe, 2.3 million followers watching her Instagram live. The pregnancy glow was real, and her audience was eating it up. "Okay, my beautiful Sterling squad," she said, her voice carrying that perfect blend of authenticity and polish that had built her empire. "Tonight is special. I'm here with someone incredible, and I have news that's going to change everything." The comments exploded across her screen. Heart emojis, fire symbols, and endless speculation about her mysterious dinner companion. Madison had been teasing this announcement for weeks, watching her follower count surge with each cryptic post. Alexander Blackwood sat across from her, his dark eyes reflecting the city lights. At 35, the tech billionaire commanded attention without trying. His company, Nexus Dynamics, had revolutionized social media analytics, making him one of the youngest men on the Forbes list. More importantly for Madison's purposes, he was Chase Hamilton's biggest rival. "Ready?" Alexander asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Madison nodded, turning back to her phone. "Sterling squad, I want you to meet Alexander Blackwood, but more importantly." She paused for maximum impact, watching the viewer count climb past 2.5 million. "I'm 12 weeks pregnant." The comments section went absolutely insane. Her phone started overheating from the activity. Congratulations mixed with shock, speculation about the father, and thousands of people tagging their friends. This was exactly what she'd hoped for. But across the restaurant, she spotted a familiar figure being seated at a corner table. Chase Hamilton, her ex-husband, had just walked in with his new fiancée, the stunning model Scarlett Rose. Madison's heart rate spiked, but she kept her smile perfect for the camera. Chase looked different, older, more weathered. The confidence that had once attracted her now seemed like arrogance. Scarlett clung to his arm, all legs and blonde hair, exactly the type of trophy wife Chase had always wanted Madison to become. "The father," Madison continued, aware that Chase was now staring directly at her. "Well, that's a story for another day. But what I can tell you is that this baby is going to be so loved, so protected, and so blessed." Alexander reached across the table, taking her hand with practiced gentleness. The gesture looked romantic on camera, but Madison felt the slight pressure of his fingers, a reminder of their agreement. In the corner, she saw Chase pull out his phone. His face had gone pale. Madison knew he was doing the math, counting back 12 weeks to the night she'd gone to his penthouse to collect her remaining belongings. The night she'd been vulnerable and stupid, seeking comfort from the man who'd destroyed her life. The night that had created the child growing inside her. "I love you all so much," Madison said, preparing to end the stream. "Tomorrow I'll be sharing the full story on my YouTube channel. You're not going to believe what I've been through, or how this miracle came to be." She ended the stream and immediately checked the metrics. 3.1 million peak viewers. The video would be reposted across every platform within hours. Her mentions were already trending. "Perfect performance," Alexander said, signaling for the check. "He looks like he's seen a ghost." Madison glanced over at Chase, who was now having an intense, whispered conversation with Scarlett. The model kept glancing in Madison's direction, her perfect features twisted with something that might have been fear. "This is just the beginning," Madison replied, placing her hand protectively over her stomach. "He took everything from me once. Now it's my turn." As they prepared to leave, Madison caught Chase's eye one final time. For just a moment, she saw something that might have been regret flash across his face. But then Scarlett whispered something in his ear, and his expression hardened into the cold mask she remembered from their divorce proceedings. The game had officially begun. 6 months earlier, Madison Sterling had been Mrs. Chase Hamilton, living in a $15 million penthouse overlooking Central Park. She'd traded her small-town dreams of becoming a teacher for the glittering promise of New York society. Her lifestyle blog had been a hobby then, something to fill the hours while Chase built his real estate empire. The first crack in her perfect life came on a rainy Tuesday in March. Madison had been organizing Chase's home office while he was in Dubai, trying to surprise him with a complete filing system. That's when she'd found the offshore account statements hidden behind their wedding photos. Cayman Islands, British Virgin Islands, Switzerland. Millions of dollars that didn't appear on any of the financial documents she'd seen. But it was the name on one particular account that made her blood run cold: Daniel Cross Memorial Fund. Daniel Cross had been Chase's former business partner, the man whose death in a skiing accident had left Chase as the sole owner of Hamilton Enterprises. Daniel's widow, Sarah, had struggled to make ends meet with their 3 young children. Madison had always wondered why Chase, despite his wealth, had never offered to help the family. Now she understood. He'd been stealing from them all along. The confrontation that night had been brutal. Chase had returned from his trip in a foul mood, already irritated about some deal that had fallen through. When Madison showed him the documents, his reaction wasn't shame or regret. It was fury that she'd invaded his privacy. "You have no idea how business works," he'd shouted, pacing their marble-floored living room like a caged animal. Daniel was going to tank the company with his bleeding heart decisions. "I saved our future." "He was your friend," Madison had whispered, clutching the papers with shaking hands. "Sarah can barely afford their mortgage." "Sarah Cross is not my responsibility," Chase had snarled. "You are. This lifestyle is. Everything you see around you exists because I make the hard choices." That night, Madison had locked herself in their guest bedroom and started researching. What she found made her sick. The Cross family wasn't Chase's only victim. There was a pattern stretching back years: business partners who died or disappeared, families left with nothing while Chase's wealth grew exponentially. She'd started documenting everything, taking photos of documents, copying files. Her plan had been to gather enough evidence to force Chase to make things right, to help the families he destroyed. She never got the chance. The stress of keeping such a devastating secret had taken its toll. Madison had always wanted children, but Chase had insisted they wait until his next big deal was complete. There was always another deal, another reason to postpone their family. But that March, she'd been pregnant and hadn't even known it yet. The night she'd finally worked up the courage to tell Chase about both the baby and her ultimatum about the stolen money, her body had made the choice for her. The cramping had started during dinner. By midnight, she was in the emergency room, losing the child she'd barely had time to dream about. Chase had been tender in the hospital, holding her hand and whispering apologies. For a moment, she'd thought the tragedy might bring them together, might shock him into becoming the man she'd fallen in love with. Instead, 2 weeks later, she'd found him in their bed with Scarlet Rose. The divorce had been swift and brutal. Chase's lawyers had outmaneuvered hers at every turn. The prenup she'd signed at 19, starstruck and in love, had protected almost none of her interests. She'd walked away with enough money to start over, but nothing compared to the empire she'd helped him build. That's when Madison had gotten serious about her platform. She'd poured her pain into content that resonated with women who'd been betrayed, overlooked, or underestimated. Her follower count had exploded from 50,000 to over 2 million in just 6 months. Brands had started throwing money at her. She'd launched the Sterling Foundation, using her platform to help small businesses owned by women and families in crisis. For the first time since leaving Chase, Madison had felt powerful. She should have known he wouldn't let her win that easily. The phone call came on a Thursday morning in October. Madison was filming a collaboration with a sustainable fashion brand when her assistant burst into the studio, face pale with panic. "Madison, you need to see this, now." The headline on TMZ made her stomach drop. Influencers charity scandal Sterling Foundation built on blood money. The article detailed how the Sterling Foundation's initial funding had come from an anonymous donor who was later revealed to be connected to several criminal enterprises. Bank records showed transactions that looked suspiciously like money laundering. The IRS was opening an investigation. Madison knew immediately who was behind it. Chase had found a way to destroy her new life just as thoroughly as he'd destroyed their marriage. Her phone started ringing nonstop. Brands pulled their partnerships. Followers began abandoning her in droves. The foundation's board called an emergency meeting to discuss her removal. By evening, Madison Sterling was once again broke, disgraced, and alone. But this time, she had a plan for revenge. Madison Sterling sat in her Honda Civic, one of the few possessions she had left, watching the rain streak down the windshield in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner in Queens. 3 weeks had passed since her world had collapsed again, and she was living day to day on the money she'd managed to withdraw before Chase's lawyers froze her accounts. Her phone, cracked from being dropped during one of her many frantic packing sessions, buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Ms. Sterling, I believe we have a mutual enemy. Midnight. Table in the back corner. Come alone." Madison stared at the message. Every instinct told her this was dangerous, possibly another trap. But what did she have left to lose? Her reputation was ruined, her foundation destroyed, and her savings nearly gone. She was 28 years old and starting over for the third time in her life. The diner was nearly empty when she arrived. A few truck drivers nursed coffee at the counter, and a woman with tired eyes worked on her laptop in a booth near the window. In the back corner, exactly as promised, sat a man Madison recognized but had never met in person. Alexander Blackwood looked different than he did in his corporate headshots. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by dark jeans and a simple sweater, but his eyes held the same intense intelligence that had made him a legend in Silicon Valley before he was 30. "Thank you for coming," he said as Madison slid into the booth across from him. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure I would either," Madison admitted. "You said we have a mutual enemy. I assume you mean Chase?" Alexander nodded, signaling the waitress for 2 coffees. "Chase Hamilton destroyed my family. Now he's trying to destroy you. I think it's time someone returned the favor." Your family, Madison, had done her research on Alexander, but she'd never found any connection to Chase. "My brother Daniel," Alexander said quietly. "Daniel Cross. He kept our mother's maiden name for business purposes." Madison felt the air leave her lungs. Daniel was your brother. My older brother. The only family I had left after our parents died. Alexander's voice was controlled, but Madison could see the pain beneath the surface. Daniel told me he was worried about Chase in the months before his death. Said Chase was pushing for increasingly aggressive deals, cutting corners on safety inspections, bribing officials. Daniel wanted to pull out of their partnership. The skiing accident, Madison whispered. Wasn't an accident. Alexander leaned forward. I've spent the last 5 years gathering evidence. Chase tampered with Daniel's equipment. He needed my brother dead to gain full control of their company and to hide the money he'd been stealing. Madison's hands trembled as she reached for her coffee. Why are you telling me this? Because you had evidence of the theft, the offshore accounts, the transactions. I know you found them. Sarah Cross told me about your visit last year, how you tried to help her family. Madison remembered that awful day, sitting in Sarah Cross's tiny apartment, watching her struggle to help her youngest daughter with homework while juggling 2 jobs and mounting bills. Madison had written her a check for $50,000 money that came from her divorce settlement, money that was indirectly connected to Daniel's death. I lost everything when Chase destroyed my foundation, Madison said. The evidence, my credibility, my platform. What could I possibly offer you? Alexander smiled, and for the first time, Madison saw something predatory in his expression. You're going to offer him something he can't resist. Yourself. What are you talking about? Chase Hamilton is a narcissist. He needs to win, especially against you. The fact that you rebuilt your life after he tried to destroy you the first time, that's eating him alive. He had to discredit you because he couldn't stand watching you succeed. Madison stared at him. You want me to go back to him? I want you to make him think you're going back to him. But first, we're going to build you up again, higher than before. My company specializes in social media analytics and viral marketing. I can make you the most followed influencer in the country if you want. And in return, you help me get close enough to Chase to finish what I started. You help me prove he killed my brother. Madison was quiet for a long moment, processing the offer. Alexander Blackwood was asking her to become bait in a revenge plot against her ex-husband. It was dangerous, possibly illegal, and definitely the kind of thing that could destroy what was left of her life. It was also exactly what she wanted. How do we start? She asked. Alexander pulled out his phone and showed her a news article dated just 6 hours ago. The headline read, Tech billionaire Alexander Blackwood announces $50 million investment in female entrepreneurs. With this, he said, tomorrow morning, you're going to be the first recipient of the Blackwood Foundation grant. $50 million to rebuild your platform and expand your foundation. The press conference is at 10. Madison's eyes widened. You're serious. Dead serious. By tomorrow night, you'll be trending on every platform. Chase won't be able to ignore you. And when he inevitably tries to destroy you again, we'll be ready. And if he doesn't take the bait, Alexander's smile turned cold. Oh, he will, because I'm going to make sure everyone knows that the woman he couldn't break is now more powerful than ever. His ego won't be able to handle it. Madison extended her hand across the table. Partners. Alexander shook it. Partners. But Madison. Yes. When this is over, Chase Hamilton won't just be ruined. He'll be exactly where he belongs. In prison, paying for what he did to Daniel and to every other person he's destroyed. As Madison drove home to her tiny studio apartment, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. But underneath the hope was something darker, something that had been growing since the night she'd lost her baby and found Chase with another woman. She wanted revenge, and now she had the means to get it. The press conference was a masterpiece of staging and timing. Alexander had chosen the ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, the same venue where Madison and Chase had held their wedding reception 4 years earlier. Every major news outlet was present, along with influencers, celebrities, and tech industry leaders. Madison stood at the podium in a stunning sapphire blue dress that complemented her dark hair and made her eyes shine with determination. She'd spent the morning with a team of stylists, makeup artists, and media coaches that Alexander had hired. The result was breathtaking. She looked powerful, confident, and completely unbroken. 6 months ago, Madison began, her voice carrying clearly through the room. I lost everything. My foundation was destroyed by false accusations. My reputation was shattered, and I found myself starting over from nothing. Today, I'm here to announce that sometimes our greatest failures are just preparation for our greatest comebacks. The cameras flashed as Alexander joined her on stage. He looked every inch the successful tech mogul in his perfectly tailored charcoal suit. But when he looked at Madison, his expression was warm and admiring. The Blackwood Foundation exists to support women who refuse to stay down, Alexander said, taking the microphone. Madison Sterling represents everything we believe in: resilience, innovation, and the power to transform pain into purpose. I'm proud to announce a $50 million investment in her vision. The room erupted in applause. Madison could see reporters frantically typing on their phones, already crafting the headlines that would dominate the news cycle. But her attention was focused on the back of the room, where she'd spotted a familiar face. Scarlett Rose stood near the exit, clearly trying to remain inconspicuous. The model was filming everything on her phone, her usually perfect composure replaced by something that looked like panic. Madison smiled directly at the camera as she took the microphone back. The new Sterling Foundation will focus on 3 key areas supporting women escaping abusive relationships, funding female-led startups, and providing legal assistance to families who have been victimized by corporate fraud. That last part was pointed, and everyone in the room knew it. The questions came fast and relentless during the Q&A session. Ms. Sterling, are you referring to your own experience with corporate fraud? Is this announcement connected to your divorce from real estate mogul Chase Hamilton? Mr. Blackwood, what's your personal relationship with Ms. Sterling? Madison handled each question with poise, never directly naming Chase but making it clear that her mission was personal. Alexander played his part perfectly, appearing supportive but maintaining just enough distance to fuel speculation about their relationship. After the press conference, they retreated to Alexander's penthouse office overlooking the Hudson River. Madison collapsed into a leather chair, the adrenaline finally wearing off. Phase 1 complete, Alexander said, pouring 2 glasses of champagne. By tonight, you'll be trending on every platform. Chase's lawyers are probably already drafting cease and desist letters. Madison's phone was buzzing nonstop with interview requests, brand partnership inquiries, and messages from supporters. Her Instagram had gained 200,000 followers in the last 2 hours alone. There's something else, Alexander continued, his tone becoming more serious. I've been monitoring Chase's communications. He's planning something. My sources inside Hamilton Enterprises say he's been liquidating assets, moving money offshore. He's running or preparing for war. Either way, we need to accelerate our timeline. Alexander pulled up a series of financial documents on his laptop. These are Chase's current holdings. He's vulnerable in 3 key areas: his construction contracts with the city, his partnership with the Meridian Group, and his personal investments in cryptocurrency. Madison studied the documents, her mind racing. During their marriage, she'd learned enough about Chase's business to understand his weaknesses. The city contracts are his foundation, If those are compromised, everything else falls apart. Exactly. And I happen to know that the city is about to announce a new initiative requiring all contractors to prove they've never engaged in fraudulent practices. You're behind the initiative, Alexander smiled. I've been cultivating relationships with city officials for 3 years. The announcement comes next week. Madison felt a thrill of excitement mixed with fear. This was really happening. They were going to take down Chase Hamilton using his own tactics against him. What do you need me to do? Keep building your platform. Make yourself impossible to ignore. And when the time comes, you're going to help me get inside his inner circle. How? Alexander hesitated for a moment. By making him believe you want him back. Madison's stomach clenched. The thought of pretending to reconcile with Chase, of putting herself in his orbit again, made her feel sick. But the image of Sarah Cross struggling to pay her bills, of all the families Chase had destroyed, strengthened her resolve. I can do that, she said. Are you sure this isn't just about money or reputation anymore? Madison, if Chase suspects what we're really doing, he's capable of anything. Madison thought about the baby she'd lost, about the loneliness and fear she'd felt watching her life crumble around her. She thought about Daniel Cross, who died because he'd tried to do the right thing. I'm sure, she said, but I want insurance. Everything we discuss, everything we plan. I want it documented. If something happens to me, I want the truth to come out. Alexander nodded. Already taken care of. I have lawyers standing by. And everything is being recorded and stored in multiple locations. As Madison prepared to leave, Alexander caught her arm gently. Madison, I want you to know that this started as revenge for my brother. But getting to know you these past few weeks, working with you, I need you to understand that my feelings for you have become very real. Madison looked into his dark eyes, seeing sincerity mixed with the calculated intelligence that made him so formidable. She felt drawn to him, grateful for his support, and terrified of trusting anyone completely ever again. Let's focus on destroying Chase first, she said softly. Then we can figure out what's real between us. As she walked out into the Manhattan evening, Madison felt the weight of what she'd committed to. She was about to enter a dangerous game with the man who'd already destroyed her life twice. But this time, she wasn't playing alone. This time, she was going to win. 2 weeks after the press conference, Madison's life had transformed beyond recognition. Her social media following had exploded to over 8 million across all platforms. Brand partnerships were pouring in faster than she could evaluate them. The Sterling Foundation had received over $3 million in donations from supporters inspired by her comeback story. But the most important development was the phone call that came on a rainy Thursday evening. Madison. Chase's voice was exactly as she remembered, smooth, confident, with an underlying edge that had once thrilled her and now made her skin crawl. I think we need to talk. Madison was in Alexander's penthouse, going over the latest financial intelligence his team had gathered on Chase's operations. Alexander listened intently as she put the call on speaker. I have nothing to say to you, Chase, Madison replied, keeping her voice cold and steady. I think you do. This little publicity stunt you're pulling, this partnership with Blackwood, you're making a mistake. Alexander Blackwood isn't who you think he is. And you are... Chase was quiet for a moment. Meet me tomorrow night. Pier 17, 9 o'clock. Come alone. And I'll tell you things about your new partner that will change everything. The line went dead. Madison looked at Alexander, whose expression had gone carefully blank. It's perfect, Alexander said after a moment. He's exactly where we want him, desperate and making mistakes. What if he's telling the truth? What if there are things about you I don't know? Alexander stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. There are things about me you don't know. Madison, I've done things I'm not proud of in pursuit of justice for my brother, but everything I've told you about Chase is true. What kind of things? Alexander turned back to her, his face serious. I've been planning this revenge for 5 years. I've infiltrated his business networks, turned his allies against him, and manipulated situations to put pressure on his operations. I'm not the white knight in this story. Madison, I'm just a man who wants justice for his family. Madison felt a chill of uncertainty. Have you been manipulating me too? At first, yes. I sought you out because I knew you had information about Chase's crimes, but my feelings for you became real very quickly. I'm asking you to trust me, but I understand if you can't. Madison studied his face, looking for signs of deception. Alexander Blackwood was clearly capable of playing a long game, of hiding his true intentions behind a charming facade. But Chase Hamilton was a proven liar and manipulator who had already destroyed her life twice. I'm going to meet him, she decided, but I'm wearing a wire, and you're going to have backup nearby. Absolutely not. It's too dangerous. It's necessary. If we're going to take him down, we need him to incriminate himself, and if he has information about you that I need to know, I'd rather hear it from him directly. The next evening, Madison stood on Pier 17, wearing a cocktail dress and the most sophisticated recording equipment Alexander's security team could provide. The device was invisible, embedded in her jewelry, and would capture everything within a 50-foot radius. Chase arrived exactly on time, stepping out of a black sedan that Madison recognized as the one he'd used during their marriage. He looked older, more worn than she remembered, but still handsome in the way that had first attracted her when she was 19 and working at a coffee shop near Columbia University. You came, he said, approaching her cautiously. I'm here. Talk. Chase moved closer, and Madison caught the familiar scent of his cologne. For a moment, she was transported back to better times, to lazy Sunday mornings and romantic dinners and the dreams they'd once shared. Then she remembered finding him in their bed with Scarlet Rose, and the spell was broken. Alexander Blackwood has been planning to destroy me since before you ever met him, Chase began. He's Daniel Cross's brother, and he blames me for Daniel's death. You mean the death you caused? Chase's eyes flashed with something that might have been genuine pain. Daniel's death was an accident. Madison. Yes. We were having business disputes. Yes. I wanted him out of the partnership, but I would never have hurt him. The offshore accounts, the money you stole from his family. I moved assets to protect the company during the transition after Daniel died. Some of that money did belong to Daniel's estate, but I was planning to return it once the legal issues were resolved. Madison stared at him. You've had 5 years to return it. Because Blackwood has been systematically attacking my business every time I've tried to stabilize. Another scandal breaks. Another deal falls through. He's been destroying me piece by piece, and now he's using you to finish the job. Even if that's true, why should I care? You destroyed my foundation. You ruined my reputation. Chase stepped closer, his eyes intense. I never meant for things to go that far. When I saw how successful you'd become, how you'd built something meaningful without me, I was jealous. I was angry. I made mistakes. Mistakes you systematically destroyed everything I'd built. I know, and I hate myself for it. But Madison, Blackwood isn't trying to help you get justice. He's using you as a weapon. When he's done with me, he'll destroy you too. You know too much about his methods. Madison felt a chill of fear. What are you talking about? He's not just a tech mogul, Madison. He's connected to some very dangerous people. The money he used to fund your foundation, it's not clean. And when the authorities start investigating his operations, you're going to be implicated as an accomplice. Before Madison could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Alexander. Get out now. Chase has armed security positioned around the pier. Madison's heart rate spiked. She looked around the seemingly empty pier and spotted at least 3 men in dark clothing positioned at strategic points. This wasn't a conversation, it was a trap. You're trying to kidnap me, she said, backing away from Chase. I'm trying to save your life. Chase moved toward her, his hands raised peacefully. Madison, please. I know I've done terrible things. I know I've hurt you. But if you stay with Blackwood, you're going to end up dead or in prison. Madison! Alexander's voice echoed across the pier as he appeared from behind a shipping container, flanked by his own security team. Step away from him! Suddenly, the pier was full of armed men, all pointing weapons at each other. Madison found herself in the center of what looked like a standoff between 2 armies. This is exactly what I mean, Chase called out, his voice desperate. Look around you, Madison. This isn't justice, it's war, and you're caught in the middle. Alexander approached slowly, his hands visible but his security team maintaining their positions. Madison, get behind me. Chase is lying about everything. Am I? Chase pulled out his phone and showed Madison a series of photos. These are pictures of some of Alexander's business associates. Run their names through any law enforcement database. Madison looked at the photos and felt her blood run cold. She recognized some of the faces from news reports about organized crime investigations. Alexander, she said quietly, is this true? Alexander's expression had gone completely cold. Sometimes justice requires working with people who operate outside the law. What does that mean? It means I'll do whatever it takes to destroy the man who killed my brother. Madison realized with growing horror that both men were telling her the truth, just not the complete truth. Chase had stolen money and possibly killed Daniel Cross, but Alexander was connected to dangerous criminals and had been manipulating her from the beginning. She was trapped between 2 men who were willing to destroy anyone to get what they wanted, including her. The standoff on the pier lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Madison knew because she'd been watching the timer on her phone, calculating how long she had before someone started shooting. The resolution came from an unexpected source, police sirens wailing in the distance, growing closer by the second. Someone called the cops. One of Alexander's security men reported. Both teams of armed men began retreating immediately, disappearing into the maze of shipping containers and warehouse buildings that surrounded the pier. Within moments, Madison found herself alone with Chase and Alexander, 3 people who'd been lovers, enemies, and conspirators, now united only by the need to avoid police attention. My car, Chase said tersely, pointing toward his sedan. Unless you want to explain to the NYPD why you were meeting with 2 men who have armed security details. Madison looked at Alexander, who nodded grimly. Whatever their differences, none of them could afford police scrutiny right now. The drive to Alexander's penthouse was silent and tense. Madison sat in the back seat between the 2 men who'd shaped her adult life, feeling like a prisoner rather than a person with agency in her own story. The recording device in her jewelry was still active, capturing every breath and rustle of movement. Inside Alexander's apartment, the 3 of them stood in the living room like adversaries waiting for a duel to begin. Talk, Madison said finally. Both of you. No more games. No more manipulation. I want the complete truth. Chase spoke first. Daniel Cross was my partner and my friend. We disagreed about business practices, but I didn't kill him. His death was investigated by the police, the insurance companies, and private investigators. Everyone concluded it was an accident. Because you covered it up, Alexander shot back. You paid off the ski resort staff, you bribed the equipment inspector, and you made sure the investigation was superficial. Prove it. I've been trying to prove it for 5 years. Every witness disappears. Every piece of evidence gets destroyed. Every lead goes nowhere. You've had years to cover your tracks. Madison held up her hand for silence. Alexander, tell me about your business associates. The men in those photos. Alexander's jaw tightened. When legal channels fail, sometimes you have to explore other options. I've worked with people who have the resources to dig deeper than law enforcement can or will. You mean criminals? I mean people who understand that sometimes the system protects the wrong people. Chase laughed bitterly. Listen to yourself. Blackwood, you're justifying working with the mob because you can't accept that your brother died in an accident. My brother called me the night before he died, Alexander said, his voice rising. He said he'd found evidence that you were stealing from clients, that you were cutting safety corners on construction projects. He was going to expose you. Daniel was paranoid and unstable in his final months. He was seeing conspiracies everywhere. Because you were gaslighting him, making him question his own judgment, isolating him from allies, destroying his confidence. It's the same thing you did to Madison during your marriage. Madison felt a chill of recognition. Chase had done exactly that, made her doubt her own perceptions, convinced her that her concerns about his business practices were naive and unfounded. Even if that's true, Madison said slowly, it doesn't justify what either of you have done to me. Chase, you destroyed my foundation and my reputation. Alexander, you've been lying to me about your motivations and your methods. Both men started to speak, but Madison cut them off. I'm done being your pawn, both of you. I'm going to the FBI tomorrow morning with everything I know about both of your operations. Madison, you can't, Alexander said urgently. You're implicated now. The money you've accepted, the foundation you've built it all connects back to my operations. You'll be arrested as an accomplice. And if you expose Blackwood's criminal connections, Chase added, you'll become a target. These aren't people who let witnesses walk away. Madison realized with growing panic that both men were right. She'd been so focused on revenge that she'd let herself become complicit in activities that could destroy her life or end it entirely. So what are my options? She asked. Work with me, Chase said. Help me expose Blackwood's criminal connections. In exchange, I'll provide evidence that clears you of any wrongdoing and ensures your safety. Or work with me, Alexander countered. Help me finally get proof of Chase's crimes. I'll make sure you're protected from any blowback from my business associates. Madison looked between them, two powerful men offering her protection in exchange for betraying the other. She was exhausted by the games, the lies, the constant manipulation. There's a third option, she said finally. Both men looked at her expectantly. I disappear. Tonight, I take what money I can access, change my identity, and start over somewhere far away from both of you. Madison, be realistic, Chase said. You can't run from this. The connections are too deep, the implications too serious. He's right, Alexander agreed. And besides, running means giving up everything you've built, your platform, your foundation, your influence. Is that really what you want? Madison thought about the millions of women who followed her, who'd been inspired by her comeback story. She thought about the families she was helping through the Sterling Foundation, the real good she was doing in the world. But she also thought about the terrified woman who'd been standing on that pier an hour ago, surrounded by armed men and realizing she'd become a pawn in a game she didn't understand. "What I want," she said carefully, "is to make sure that whatever happens next, I'm making the choice, not being manipulated into it." She pulled out her phone and showed them a text message she'd received while they were driving. "Madison, this is Rebecca Finch from ProPublica. I've been investigating both Chase Hamilton and Alexander Blackwood. I have information you need to see. Call me." Both men's faces went pale. "You've been in contact with a reporter?" Chase asked. "Not yet, but I'm going to be tonight, and I'm going to tell her everything." "Madison," Alexander said urgently, "you don't understand what you're doing." "Actually, I think I'm finally understanding exactly what I'm doing. I'm taking control of my own story." Madison headed toward the door, but Alexander caught her arm. "If you do this, there's no going back. Once that story breaks, everyone involved becomes a target." Madison looked into his eyes, seeing genuine concern mixed with the calculated intelligence that made him so dangerous. "Then I guess we'd better make sure we're on the right side when the dust settles." As she left Alexander's penthouse, Madison felt something she hadn't experienced in months, the clarity that comes from making a decision based on your own values rather than someone else's agenda. She was done being anyone's victim. It was time to become the author of her own revenge. Rebecca Finch's apartment in Brooklyn was a stark contrast to the luxury penthouses Madison had been frequenting. Books and newspapers covered every surface. Multiple computer screens displayed research databases, and the walls were lined with evidence boards connecting various corporate scandals. "Thank you for coming," Rebecca said, pouring coffee from a pot that looked like it had been brewing for hours. "I know this must be overwhelming." Madison sat on the worn couch, looking at an evidence board dedicated entirely to her ex-husband. Photos, financial documents, and news clippings created a web of connections that went back over a decade. "How long have you been investigating Chase?" 3 years. It started with a tip about the Cross family situation, but the deeper I dug, the more I found. Chase Hamilton isn't just a corrupt businessman, he's the center of a network that includes money laundering, bribery, and possibly murder. Rebecca pulled out a thick folder and set it on the coffee table. But Alexander Blackwood is just as dangerous, maybe more so, because he's been operating under the guise of seeking justice. Madison opened the folder and felt her blood run cold. Bank records showed millions of dollars flowing between Alexander's companies and organizations known to be fronts for organized crime. Photos showed Alexander meeting with men who were under FBI investigation. Email screenshots revealed discussions about removing obstacles and permanent solutions. "Alexander hasn't been trying to expose Chase through legal channels," Rebecca continued. "He's been planning to have him killed." "That's impossible," Madison whispered. But even as she said it, she remembered Alexander's cold expression on the pier, his talk of working with people who operate outside the law, the meeting tonight on the pier. That wasn't a coincidence. Alexander's people were there to eliminate Chase permanently. You being there complicated things, but the plan was always murder. Madison's hands shook as she turned the pages. "And the money he gave my foundation, laundered through his tech company from drug trafficking operations. Madison, you've been unknowingly helping him clean millions of dollars in criminal proceeds." The room felt like it was spinning. Madison had spent months thinking she was fighting for justice, when in reality she'd been facilitating organized crime. What about Chase? The evidence against him? Rebecca's expression softened. Chase Hamilton is definitely guilty of fraud, embezzlement, and probably manslaughter in Daniel Cross's death. But he's not connected to organized crime. He's just a garden-variety sociopathic businessman. So I have to choose between a murderer and a killer. Actually, you have a third option. You can help me expose both of them. Rebecca pulled out another folder, this one containing legal documents. I've been working with the FBI for 6 months. They're building a RICO case against Alexander's organization, and they need someone on the inside to help them gather evidence. You want me to be an informant? I want you to help put away 2 men who've been destroying lives for years. In exchange, you'll receive immunity for your unknowing participation in money laundering, and the FBI will provide witness protection if necessary. Madison stared at the immunity agreement. It was exactly what she'd been hoping for, a way out of the mess she'd gotten herself into, but it also meant betraying both men who'd shaped her adult life, even if they deserved it. There's something else you need to know, Rebecca said gently. The baby you're carrying, have you had a paternity test? Madison's hand moved instinctively to her stomach. I know who the father is. Do you? Because according to my research, you were involved with both Chase and Alexander during the conception window. The words hit Madison like a physical blow. She'd been so certain the baby was Chase's, conceived during their final encounter at his penthouse. But now that Rebecca mentioned it, there had been that night early in her partnership with Alexander, when grief and revenge and loneliness had led to a moment of intimacy she'd tried to forget. I need to think about this, Madison said, standing up. Madison, you don't have much time. The FBI is moving on Alexander next week. If you're going to cooperate, it has to be now. As Madison walked out into the Brooklyn night, her phone rang. It was Alexander. Madison, where are you? After you left, Chase contacted me. He wants to meet tomorrow, all 3 of us. He says he has evidence that will change everything. What kind of evidence? Proof that someone else has been orchestrating everything. Someone who's been playing all of us against each other. Madison felt a new chill of fear. Who? He wouldn't say over the phone. But Madison, I need you to know something. Whatever you've heard about me, whatever you think you know, there's more to the story. Meet us tomorrow, and I'll explain everything. Where? The Hamilton Enterprises building. Noon, top floor. The line went dead. Madison stared at her phone, trying to process everything she'd learned in the past few hours. Chase was a thief and possibly a killer. Alexander was connected to organized crime and had been planning murder. Someone else might be manipulating all of them, and she was pregnant with a child whose father could be either a criminal or a killer. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Don't trust the reporter. Meet me tomorrow at 11 a.m., Pier 17. Come alone. I have proof that will save your life. S. Madison stared at the message. S could only be Scarlet Rose, Chase's fiancée, the woman she'd seen filming at her press conference, who'd been watching and listening to everything. Madison realized that in a game full of liars and manipulators, the person who might hold the key to the truth was the one she dismissed as nothing more than a trophy wife. Tomorrow, she would finally learn who had been pulling the strings in her nightmare. But first, she had to decide whether she was brave enough to face whatever truth was waiting for her. As she walked toward the subway, Madison felt the baby move for the first time, a gentle flutter that reminded her that whatever choice she made, she wasn't just deciding her own fate anymore. She was choosing the kind of world her child would be born into. Madison arrived at Pier 17 at exactly 11 a.m., her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. The morning sun reflected off the East River, creating a deceptively peaceful scene that contrasted sharply with the life and death stakes of what she was about to learn. Scarlett Rose emerged from behind a maintenance building, looking nothing like the glamorous model Madison had always seen her as. Gone were the designer clothes and perfect makeup. Instead, she wore simple jeans and a Columbia University sweatshirt, her blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. For the first time, Madison could see the intelligence in her eyes that had been hidden behind the facade of arm candy. "Thank you for coming," Scarlett said, approaching cautiously. "I wasn't sure you would. You said you had proof that could save my life. I'm listening." Scarlett pulled out a tablet and showed Madison a series of documents. "Everything you think you know about the last year of your life is wrong. Chase didn't destroy your foundation. Alexander didn't seek you out for revenge. And I'm not just some model who got lucky with a rich boyfriend." Madison stared at the screen, which displayed FBI credentials and case files. "Your federal law enforcement. Special Agent Scarlett Rose, Financial Crimes Division. I've been undercover for 2 years, investigating a money laundering operation that involves both Chase and Alexander." "That's impossible. Alexander is working with criminals, but Chase is the head of the entire operation," Scarlett interrupted. "Madison, Alexander Blackwood's brother wasn't killed because he discovered Chase's theft. He was killed because he discovered that Chase was running a massive money laundering scheme through construction projects, and Alexander was his partner." Madison felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "Alexander is working with Chase. Has been for 5 years. The supposed rivalry, the revenge plot, your foundation funding, it's all been theater designed to hide their real business. They needed a way to clean large amounts of criminal money through legitimate charitable organizations." Scarlett showed Madison bank records that revealed the truth. The Sterling Foundation hadn't been funded by Alexander's legitimate tech company. It had been funded by a shell corporation that both men controlled, using money from drug trafficking, arms dealing, and human trafficking. The night Daniel Cross died, he wasn't planning to expose Chase for stealing from clients. He was planning to expose both men for working with the cartels. So they killed him together. Madison's legs gave out, and she sank onto a nearby bench. The pregnancy announcement, the press conference, all of it was designed to make you look like an innocent victim while they used your platform to launder millions of dollars. Your success, your comeback story, your relationship with Alexander, none of it was real. But they hate each other. I've seen them fight, seen them threaten each other. Scarlett sat down beside her. They're very good actors, and they had a lot of motivation to sell the performance. If anyone suspected they were partners, their entire operation would collapse. Madison thought about every interaction she'd had with both men over the past months. The rescue by Alexander, the threats from Chase, the standoff on the pier, all of it had been choreographed to maintain the illusion that they were enemies. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because tomorrow morning, the FBI is arresting both of them. Their entire organization is being taken down in a coordinated operation across 3 states. But Madison, they know the investigation is closing in. They're planning to eliminate you tonight." What? Scarlett pulled up another document on her tablet, email exchanges between Chase and Alexander discussing loose ends and necessary sacrifices. "You know too much about their operations. Your foundation has been the primary vehicle for laundering money. And you have access to all the financial records. They can't afford to let you testify." Madison's hand moved protectively to her stomach. "The baby makes you an even bigger liability. If something happens to you, there will be a massive investigation. But if you die in what appears to be an accident, especially one that can be blamed on stress from your complicated personal situation, the investigation stops with you." The meeting this afternoon at Hamilton Enterprises is a trap. They're going to kill you and make it look like a suicide. A pregnant woman, overwhelmed by scandal and facing criminal charges, takes her own life. Madison stood up, pacing frantically. I have to run. I have to disappear. You can't run from this. Madison, they have resources, connections, and a desperate need to silence you permanently. But there is another option. Scarlett pulled out a small device that looked like a hearing aid. This is a recording device that's undetectable by standard security sweeps. If you can get them to admit their partnership and their plans for you, we'll have enough evidence to arrest them immediately. You want me to walk into a trap. I want you to spring the trap back on them. Madison, you're the only person who can get close enough to both of them to record a confession. Without that evidence, they might walk away from this with minimal charges. Madison thought about all the families who'd been destroyed by Chase and Alexander's crimes. Sarah Cross and her children, the victims of human trafficking whose suffering had funded Madison's foundation. The women who donated to her cause, believing they were supporting something meaningful. If I do this, what guarantee do I have that I'll survive? I'll be in the building with a full tactical team. The moment we have what we need, we move. But Madison, I have to be honest with you, there's significant risk. Madison closed her eyes, feeling the baby move inside her. She thought about the conversation she'd had with Rebecca Finch about choosing what kind of world her child would be born into. There's something else, Scarlett continued gently. We ran DNA tests on samples from your doctor's office. The baby's father is Alexander. Madison felt a final piece of her world crumble. Even her pregnancy, which she'd thought was the one authentic thing in her life, was connected to the web of lies and manipulation. Why are you helping me? Really, Scarlett's expression softened. Because I've watched you for months, thinking you were just another socialite who'd gotten in over her head. But you're not. You're someone who's been systematically victimized by men who saw you as nothing more than a useful tool. You deserve better. Madison looked out at the river, thinking about the naive 19-year-old who'd fallen in love with Chase Hamilton, and the broken 28-year-old who'd thought Alexander Blackwood was her salvation. If I do this, if I help you get the evidence you need, what happens to me after? Witness protection is available, but honestly, I think you're strong enough to rebuild again, this time on your own terms, with the truth on your side. Madison turned back to Scarlett, decision crystallizing in her mind. Give me the device. Are you sure? I'm sure, but I want more than just arrests. I want every family they've hurt to get compensation. I want their entire fortune seized and distributed to their victims. Done. As Scarlett fitted the recording device, Madison felt something she hadn't experienced in over a year, true agency over her own life. For months, she'd been reacting to other people's plans, falling for other people's lies, fighting other people's wars. Now, finally, she was going to take control. Madison, Scarlett said as they prepared to part ways. Whatever happens in that building, remember that you're not the victim in this story anymore. You're the hero. As Madison walked toward what might be the most dangerous afternoon of her life, she felt her baby move again, a reminder that whatever courage she needed, she was carrying it inside her. It was time to end this game once and for all. The 62nd floor of the Hamilton Enterprises building had always intimidated Madison during her marriage to Chase. The executive conference room, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, had been the site of deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Now, as she stepped off the elevator at exactly noon, it felt like entering a tomb. Chase and Alexander were already there, standing on opposite sides of the conference table in what appeared to be a tense standoff. The performance was flawless. Two enemies forced to work together by circumstances beyond their control. "Madison," Chase said, his voice carrying genuine relief. "Thank God you came. I was afraid Blackwood might have convinced you not to trust me." "She shouldn't trust either of us," Alexander replied, his dark eyes fixed on Madison with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "We've all made mistakes, done things we regret." Madison took a seat at the head of the conference table, the recording device Scarlett had given her capturing every word. She placed her hands protectively over her stomach, a gesture that drew both men's attention to her pregnancy. "I'm here because I want the truth," Madison said. "All of it. No more games, no more manipulation. Just the truth." Chase pulled out a thick folder and slid it across the table. "The truth is that someone has been playing all three of us. Someone who's been orchestrating events for months, maybe years." Madison opened the folder, which contained financial documents, email printouts, and surveillance photos. But as she studied them, she realized they were all fabrications, sophisticated forgeries designed to support whatever lie Chase was about to tell. "Alexander, show her your evidence." Chase continued. Alexander placed his own folder on the table. "These documents prove that Chase has been planning to eliminate both of us. Madison, the meeting at the pier, the standoff Chase was positioning his people to kill me and make it look like a gang war." Madison pretended to study Alexander's documents, which were equally false. Both men were still maintaining their fiction, even in what they believed was their final confrontation. "There's something neither of you are telling me," Madison said carefully. "Something about why you really brought me here today." The two men exchanged a look, brief, but Madison caught it. For just a moment, the mask slipped, and she saw the truth. They were partners, not enemies. "Madison," Chase said, his voice taking on a gentler tone, "there's no easy way to say this. You know too much about both of our operations. You've been exposed to information that could destroy us both." "What Chase is trying to say," Alexander added, moving closer, "is that your safety depends on your continued cooperation and your silence." Madison felt her heart rate spike as she realized the trap was closing. Both men were now positioned between her and the door. The conference room, 60 floors above the street, had no other exits. "You're threatening me." "We're protecting you," Chase corrected. "From yourself, from your impulses to do the right thing without understanding the consequences." Alexander sat down across from her, his expression almost paternal. "Madison, you've been an excellent partner in our operation. The Foundation has been incredibly effective for our purposes." "Your purposes, money laundering," Chase said matter-of-factly. "Your platform gave us access to millions of small donors whose contributions could be mixed with larger illegal funds without triggering financial oversight." Madison forced herself to remain calm, even as the recording device captured their confessions. "So, my comeback, my success, none of it was real." "Your talent is real," Alexander said. "Your ability to inspire people, to build trust that's genuine. We simply provided the opportunity for you to use those gifts." "And the baby?" Madison asked, her voice barely a whisper. Alexander's expression softened slightly. "Is mine, and that complicates things considerably." Chase leaned forward. "Which is why we need to discuss your future very carefully. Madison, you're going to continue running the Foundation. You're going to marry Alexander. And you're going to forget everything you think you know about our business operations. And if I refuse..." The silence that followed was answer enough. Madison saw both men's hands move slightly toward their jackets, where she now realized they were carrying weapons. "Madison," Alexander said quietly. "You're carrying my child. I don't want to hurt you, but I will protect our operation at any cost. Even if it means killing the mother of your baby. Even then." Madison stood up slowly, her mind racing. The recording device had captured everything: confessions to money laundering, threats against her life, and admissions of partnership between the two men, but she was still trapped 60 floors above the street with two armed killers. "There's one thing you both forgot," she said. "What's that?" Chase asked. "I'm not the same naive woman you've been manipulating. I'm not your victim anymore." She pressed a button on her phone, and immediately the conference room filled with the sound of their conversation being broadcast. Alexander lunged for her phone, but it was too late. The live stream was already going out to her 8 million followers. "What did you do?" Alexander snarled. "I gave my audience exactly what they wanted," Madison replied. "The truth." Chase pulled out his gun, but before he could aim it, the conference room doors burst open. FBI agents, led by Scarlet Rose, flooded the room with weapons drawn. "Drop your weapons, now," Scarlet commanded. Both men complied immediately, their faces showing shock and betrayal as they realized how completely they'd been outmaneuvered. "Alexander Blackwood, Chase Hamilton, you're under arrest for money laundering, conspiracy to commit murder, and about 40 other federal charges," Scarlet announced as agents cuffed both men. As they were led away, Chase called out to Madison, "You have no idea what you've done. The people we work for, they won't let this stand." "Actually," Scarlet said, smiling grimly, "they won't be a problem. Your entire network was arrested this morning in coordinated raids across 3 states. Madison sank into her chair, the adrenaline finally wearing off. Her phone was still live streaming, showing her millions of followers the aftermath of the arrests. The comments were exploding with support, shock, and amazement at what they'd just witnessed. "It's over," Scarlet said, approaching Madison. "You did it." Madison looked out at the Manhattan skyline, thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment. A small-town girl who'd fallen for the wrong man, lost everything twice, and finally learned to save herself. "No," she said quietly. "It's just beginning." 6 months later, Madison Sterling sat in the nursery of her new home in Portland, Oregon, watching her daughter sleep in the afternoon sunlight. Emma Rose Sterling had been born healthy and perfect, with dark hair like her mother and eyes that would probably darken to match her father's, though Alexander Blackwood would never know his daughter. The trials had been swift and decisive. Both Chase and Alexander had received life sentences without the possibility of parole. The money laundering network they'd built had been completely dismantled, with over $200 million in assets seized and distributed to victims of their crimes. Madison's live stream of their confession had become the most watched video in social media history, with over 50 million views in the first 24 hours. But more importantly, it had inspired thousands of other women to come forward with their own stories of manipulation and abuse by powerful men. The new Sterling Foundation, rebuilt from scratch with completely transparent funding sources, had become one of the most respected charitable organizations in the country. Madison's book, The Perfect Storm, My Journey from Victim to Victor, had spent 6 months at the top of the bestseller lists, but the greatest transformation had been in Madison herself. "There you are," came a warm voice from the doorway. Detective James Murphy stepped into the nursery, still wearing his Portland police uniform after finishing his shift. They'd met during the FBI debriefing process, when James had been assigned as her liaison with local law enforcement for witness protection. What had started as professional respect had slowly grown into something deeper, a relationship built on honesty, trust, and shared values rather than manipulation and lies. "How are my girls?" James asked, wrapping his arms around Madison from behind as they both looked down at Emma. "Perfect," Madison replied, leaning back against his chest. "I was just thinking about how different everything is now." Different how Madison gestured toward her laptop, which showed the metrics for her latest social media post, a simple photo of Emma's tiny hand holding her finger. 2 million likes, 50,000 comments, all celebrating new life and new hope. A year ago, I was using my platform to launder money for criminals. Now I'm using it to help other women find their voices and build their own foundations of strength. James kissed the top of her head. "You've helped a lot of people, Madison. The calls we get at the station from women who found the courage to leave abusive situations because of your story, it's remarkable." Madison's phone buzzed with a text from Scarlett Rose, who had become one of her closest friends. "Saw the news about the congressional hearing. They're really going to pass the Madison Sterling Act, the legislation, which would require stricter oversight of charitable organizations and provide additional protections for whistleblowers. Had been inspired by Madison's experience. It would prevent future criminals from using foundations the way Chase and Alexander had used hers. "I have to go to Washington next week for the final vote," Madison told James. "Will you and Emma come with me? Wouldn't miss it. Besides, someone needs to make sure you don't get too famous and forget about us regular people." Madison laughed, a sound that still sometimes surprised her with its genuine joy. "Regular people? You're the detective who helped bring down a multi-state criminal organization. Only because I fell for this incredible woman who refused to stay a victim." As Emma stirred in her sleep, Madison felt a profound sense of peace. The nightmare that had begun with her marriage to Chase Hamilton was finally, truly over. But more than that, she had discovered something she'd never expected: her own strength. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Sarah Cross. "Daniel's widow. Madison, I wanted you to know that the compensation fund finally came through. My kids are going to be able to go to college. Thank you for never giving up on getting justice for Daniel." Madison smiled, remembering the young woman she'd been when this all started, desperate for approval, willing to compromise her values for security, terrified of being alone. That woman felt like a stranger now. "What are you thinking about?" James asked. "Just how sometimes the worst things that happen to us become the foundation for the best things." Madison replied, "If Chase hadn't betrayed me, if I hadn't lost everything, I never would have found my real strength. I never would have learned that I don't need anyone to save me. You saved yourself. I saved myself, and then I found someone who sees that strength and celebrates it instead of trying to diminish it." Emma opened her eyes then, looking up at her mother with the serious expression that newborns wear when they're taking in the world. Madison picked up her daughter, marveling again at the miracle of this new life. "You're going to grow up in a different world than I did," Madison whispered to Emma. "A world where you'll know from the beginning that your worth isn't determined by anyone else, that you don't need to be rescued. You need to be respected." As the sun set over Portland, Madison Sterling looked out at her new life with gratitude and determination. She had survived the perfect storm of betrayal and manipulation. She had transformed her pain into power, her victimization into victory. But most importantly, she had learned that the only person who could define Madison Sterling was Madison Sterling herself. And that was a lesson she would make sure to pass on to every woman who followed her story, especially the little girl sleeping peacefully in her arms. The perfect storm had passed. The calm that followed was beautiful, hard-won, and entirely her own. If Madison's journey from victim to victor inspired you, smash that like button and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. What would you have done in Madison's situation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because stories of strength, survival, and spectacular revenge are what we're all about here. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.